So this week we're thinking together about what St. John Cassian has to say about listlessness. Listlessness is not a very common English word. We might more usually say sloth or lethargy or even laziness. Following his master Evagrius, Cassian describes the demon of listlessness as harsh and terrible, always striking at midday. We might recall the words of Psalm 91, the destruction that wastes at noonday. Cassian says that listlessness makes us slack and full of fear. He says that listlessness causes the monk to hate his monastery, his fellow monks, work of any kind, and even the reading of Holy Scripture. It also causes the monk to experience such a hunger as he would not normally experience, even after fasting for 3 days, or on a long journey, or after heavy labour. Listlessness then distracts the monk, making him think that the only cure is to visit other monks, or even that he ought to sleep it off. As with Cassian's other vices, one thing leads to another. The monk becomes wayward and lazy, wandering from monastery to monastery, looking for food and drink. And finally he is ensnared in worldly things and abandons the monastic life altogether. Cassian cites a long passage from 2 Thessalonians 3, in which the apostle tells us to withdraw from the company of the listless. St. Paul tells us the cure for the listless person is that they should work quietly and eat their own bread. Drawing on the desert tradition, Cassian says that monks should not be without work at any time, especially while they are young. They are to work in order to meet their own requirements, but also to provide for those in need. He writes, "The fathers also say that as a rule someone who works is attacked and afflicted by but a single demon, while someone who does not work is taken prisoner by 1,000 evil spirits." We might think of the phrase, "the devil finds work for idle hands." Cassian concludes his treatment with some sage advice he received when he was young. He says that he was troubled by listlessness and so went to Abba Moses and said, "Yesterday I was greatly troubled and weakened by listlessness, and I was not able to free myself from it until I went to see Abba Paul. Abba Moses replied to me by saying, 'So far from freeing yourself from it, you have surrendered to it completely and become its slave. You must realize that it will attack all the more severely because you have deserted your post, unless from now on you strive to subdue it through patience, prayer, and manual labor.'" I think we will all recognize something in Cassian's diagnosis of listlessness. Angela Tilby, in her book on Evagrius, describes listlessness as a thick, wet blanket that inhibits all energy and purpose. It is an extreme boredom, that sense of time ticking by incredibly slowly, an inability to concentrate, and we long for distraction. I've often found myself feeling listless, sitting at my desk in that afternoon slump. I'm frequently tempted by the post-lunch nap, and perhaps now I'll try and be a bit more cautious. But what are we to do with this feeling? Well, as we've discussed here before, the temptation is not the same thing as the sin, and so I think we need to think a little bit more about what's going on here. It might feel like listlessness is a sin of the body, like gluttony or lust, but for Cassian it is something that affects the soul. We need to look into our hearts and examine that feeling of wandering attention, wandering desires. Listlessness makes us unhappy with our lot. We fail to find meaning in our day-to-day tasks, and we fail to pay them proper attention. On the one hand, we might sit at our desks watching cat videos on YouTube, or watch the clock ticking slowly away, wondering when our next break might be. On the other hand, listlessness might not just be laziness, the temptation to sit and do nothing, but it might also be something we see very often in our contemporary society, the desire to be busy. We can just as easily accumulate for ourselves more work, more tasks, all to give us a sense of purpose, a sense that what we are doing is really important. Even in our busy world, and especially now as the domestic and work spheres are fused in unhealthy ways because of the pandemic, we can find that we are often doing nothing, even when we appear to be doing something. How many meetings could have been a quick email exchange? How many email exchanges could have been a quick phone call? Our work can easily proliferate, and it leaves us exhausted and worn out, distracted, and unable to concentrate. The proliferation of work can leave us feeling listless. Cassian's writings here challenge us to find meaning and purpose in our daily rhythm. He's not saying there should be no time for cat videos on YouTube, everything in its proper place. But if we are to overcome the feeling of listlessness, we need to think about our work, all those things we do day by day, and ask ourselves what they mean for us as human beings, for our relationships with others, and our relationship with God. We all have to do things that we don't enjoy, but perhaps we need to get better at asking for the grace to see them properly, to see how they fit into the whole. Pope John Paul II wrote an encyclical on human work, which is an important document for Catholic social teaching, dealing with the rights of workers, among other things. But one of the phrases that struck me in it is about the dignity of work, that work, which is different from toil, is part of what it means to be human, to share in God's creative and continuing work in the world. It might seem hard in the moment, perhaps a little after lunch when you're feeling sleepy, to remember the dignity of work. But if we are to overcome the listlessness that entrenches itself in us, and indeed in our society, we need to recover a sense of meaning in our working lives, combined, as Abba Moses said to Cassian all those years ago, with prayer and patience.